And a study was done in the late 80s by a neuroanatomist named Simon LeVay. LeVay is one of the all-time great neuroanatomists. He was trained by Hubel and Wiesel, was a professor at Harvard Med School for a while before moving to the Salk Institute. And what he did was look post-mortem at the brains of a bunch of individuals where he knew the sexual orientation, men, and what he showed was gay men on the average had this nucleus on the average was half the size that you saw in heterosexual men. On the average, it was about the same size as you saw in heterosexual women. Amazing landmark study. Everybody learned about the homosexual brain from this study. Hugely widely reported, and this is kind of interesting. That paper by LeVay was published in the journal Science, again, constantly mentioned as probably the most influential science journal in this country, and it was published, what year was it? 88, 92, 90, okay, I'm getting the year wrong, but it was just before the Clinton election against Bush, where one of the big issues was gays in the military. That was the first thing that Clinton turned to after he was elected. I happen to know the man who was the editor of Science at the time, and they timed the publication. That paper came out in late October that year, and they held it for that time because they knew that this was going to be an issue in the election, which is kind of cool that they did that, although some people may disagree. Okay.
Just look at the arrogance. Not just that the journal Science strategically delayed a publication in order to influence an election, but that this man would have no hesitation admitting this in open forum. And the landmark paper couldn't be replicated. There's no reason to go into this study, but given how much time Sapolsky devotes to the politics, it's a little strange he doesn't think it important to examine the science. In typical Sapolsky fashion, what he wants to be true is proclaimed as axiomatic and the rest of you can eat it. But since he brought it up, it is odd that LeVay is the only author on a technically involved study. Was everyone else out rocking the vote? And right after publishing this, he just quit the lab to open the Institute of Gay Education in Hollywood and write a science fiction book about a researcher who finds anatomical differences in the brains of gay versus straight men and is confronted by the evil neurologist from Christianity Community College, backed by the fascist ROTC, who wants to cure homosexuality.
Great things are happening here.
A few months later, another neuroanatomist accused, alleged, wondered how odd it was that Science published the landmark results without having anyone else look over the data, and, allegedly, refused to allow anyone else access to the raw data or the samples either. Considering we have Sapolsky claiming the editor
held it for that time
anyway, it seems like there would have been plenty of time for a preliminary peer review. That's not highly suspicious at all, I assure you. Hey, is it early enough in the morning for a gay joke? Gay jokes are never funny. Challenge accepted, here we go.
So I keep yelling, I can't stand gay people, but the gay people aren't helping me up. Good night, everybody.
Funny as ever.
Whoa, wait a second. I realize in California the clocks are retarded, but I didn't think that meant the calendars are retarded. Over here in America, we do our elections on the even number years, 1992, but this was published August of 1991.
I happen to know the man who was the editor of Science at the time, and they timed the publication. That paper came out in late October that year, and they held it for that time because they knew that this was going to be an issue in the election, which is kind of cool.
And now I can't tell if he's arrogant or delusional. Did he just make the story up? I know it sounds like I'm picking on Sapolsky, but I only picked him because he's teaching a university class and should be at a higher standard. For comedic value, I could have plunged into the abyss and chosen any one of these best-selling neuroscientists who all got their PhDs under Malcolm Gladwell and are all doing postdocs at YouTube while making their living talking out their butt.
When we see a cue of social rejection, our field of vision increases.
We see wider.
We literally see wider. Our pupils dilate so we see more. Because it makes your field of vision bigger so you can see who else is sending me a cue, what's my escape route. That's literally what your body's trying to do. Ups your adrenaline, ups your cortisol. And no one can think well. Adrenaline, cortisol.
Okay, quick survey here. How many people, how many guys who have those useless nipples, how many of you go for the nipple as spandrel in guys theory? Also about human, this notion of romance. And romance is, by most sort of estimates, a relatively new invention in most cultures, maybe a couple of centuries old. And what is an invention? How's this? You take men, there's been a whole literature by now showing that you present people in brain scanners with pornography, and that must have been a really interesting human subjects release form you worked out, but showing in both sexes what you tend to see is activation of dopaminergic regions. We will hear in a little while a sex.
We're 45 minutes in and we've accomplished nothing. Standard Sapolsky rhetorical sleight of hand. Everything is presented as an introduction, as if it needed no introduction, or first body paragraph, or anything. He just tells you
There's
that
been a whole literature by now.
Deploys misdirection to derail you and patronize your ADHD with a jokey aside.
And that must have been a really interesting human subjects release form.
Then mumbles the single dumbest piece of information allowable, devoid of any content, let alone validity.
Activation of dopaminergic regions.
I remind you that this is a college biology class with grades. Here's a pro tip to high school students. Forget about the SAT, ACT, or whatever this is. The most important exam you can take is AP Bio. After about an hour of teaser trailers.
So what's up with female orgasm? Not necessary.
We finally get to a study I can look up.
How's this for subtle? You take a guy and you show him the picture of someone of the opposite sex, if he is heterosexual, and you show him the picture of this individual, and if it is someone who he assesses as being attractive, you don't necessarily get this dopaminergic pathway to activate. It depends. What this study showed was if the person is making what would pass for eye contact, if they are looking straight out, the dopamine system activates. And if they're looking elsewhere, it doesn't activate. How's that for classic male sort of responsiveness? If it looks as if this attractive person is looking at you, it activates. Even more distressingly from this study, when you show men, on the average blah blah, pictures of women who they would rate as being unattractive, it's when they're looking away that the dopamine system activates. Oh my God, what is going on here?
Kill me. You can just imagine any of the women in the comments section hearing this and concluding that the best way to approach a man in a bar is like the incel from Smile. Stay strong, kings. Nah, I'm kidding. Don't worry, fellas. There are no women in the comments section of Neuroscience videos. They all go to Netflix for their fiction.
Life has just been chaotic and dramatic and complicated.
So you can just stay over here on the Sigma male grind set, forsaking all thoughts, yet masturbating to the most superficial of both.
Hey Goop, what's up? Cool binder. Hey Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
And I especially love the little rhetorical ironic flourish at the end. Oh, it sounds so confusing. When really he means, I'll spot you dumbbells, I'm a biologist. I'm pretty sure this is the paper he's talking about, published in Nature Lifestyle, and the reason I'm sure about this is Sapolsky seems to talk a lot about studies that just happen to end up on Facebook. Boy, oh boy, are we going to come back to this again and again. Here's the actual study. Reward value of attractiveness and gaze. Okay, requiring no explanation. Here is a given example of one of the women so attractive that merely her direct gaze is felt as a reward and a promise of more to come. Pause here if you want to reload this video incognito mode. Ready? Go. It's okay, Karen. There's always delta gamma. Sorry, I shouldn't joke. Fetal alcohol syndrome is never attractive. Don't tell me that this is just a bad picture and she's actually stunning in real life. This is kind of the point. This is an fMRI study at 1.2 second intervals. The image is what generates a dopamine reaction. And I'm not even showing you the ugly girl pictures. Is her attractiveness so overpowering that it was the first thing your brain responded to? It's not clear what this could possibly measure except startle response. The differences in attractiveness rated 1 to 10 could not have been that different among the different faces. And I know this because the study declared no brain region showed any activation in response to facial attractiveness per se, which in itself is odd since there's
been a whole literature by now
showing a link between beauty of all kinds and the reward centers of the brain. But since attractiveness didn't activate any brain regions, it might be that this study wasn't testing attractiveness or even the interaction between gaze and attractiveness. Maybe this is measuring which one has a weapon or which face reminds me of the Mona Lisa. But whatever it's measuring, it isn't what Sapolsky wants it to have measured, which is a hardwired evolutionary sexual response.
How's that for classic male sort of responsiveness? If it looks as if this attractive person is looking at you, it activates.
But the study was nowhere near investigating classic male responsiveness because the study showed male and female faces to males and females. The attractiveness ratings were about the same, but the gender of the face in relation to the gender of the observer did not influence a response in the ventral striatum. That doesn't sound like anything sexually attractively rewarding or any rewarding. But he's on a roll.
Pictures of women who they would rate as being unattractive, it's when they're looking away that the dopamine system activates. Oh my.
Except the study didn't show that, or the data. It just commands that in direct gaze, as attractiveness increases, the activity should increase with a positive slope, while the correlation should be reversed when eye gaze is averted, less activation with increasing attractiveness. There's no graph, which was actually wise, so I made one to show you why you shouldn't. This shows activation versus attractiveness for a given gaze state, but you cannot use these graphs to compare the states. You can't infer that, for example, in this woman, direct gaze caused this much more activation than the averted gaze, because the actual data could have looked like this. Or this, which is why Sapolsky's explanation is technically wrong and grossly misleading. It's not correct to say that when an unattractive person looks away, the reward system activates, as if, phew, dodged a bullet and Trinity's next.
Dodge this.
You could just as legitimately claim that your brain does the opposite. For example, imagine you're sitting around watching other Holmes movies and you get a message saying lonely girls want to meet you, and your brain starts to shiver with anticipation. And then you get there and sure enough, there are lonely girls there who want to meet you. Now you're trapped in the kitchenette/bathroom with an expert on Lexapro posts, which is ironic since you're the one with PTSD. Pro tip, if she gazes into your eyes, the abyss gazes also into her. It's true, I saw it on a TikTok. Do I have it backwards? Either way, you won't get hard, but you will turn to stone. Hey, did you know that the Sigma motivational quote number 146 actually occurs in the context of a Red Pill Reddit rant? It's true, you saw it on a YouTube video. But give the gals an iPhone, or headphones, or a MacBook, or a platform, or a sandwich, or revenge, or The Secret, anything that will distract them from the angst of their own freedom, and to you they're pretty much invisible. You would never even notice they existed, so your brain doesn't deactivate. It still thinks there are girls coming over. Shiver with anticipation. Just to be clear, I don't believe this is the right explanation either, because this entire paradigm is as contrived as, well, not to get too political, but this show is 40% responsible for the rise of Donald Trump, and if you can't understand why, you're part of the other 60. But I repeat myself. You know, 0.46% is hardly a dramatic effect, and it doesn't go very far in proving his point. So why did he pick this paper to tell the class about? Hold on. Well, there you go. At least he correctly quoted The Guardian, which correctly quoted the authors, giving the incorrect explanation.
The study did more than assert the importance of eye contact. It showed the converse blessings of not achieving eye contact. Eye gaze from an unattractive face may result in disappointment and a reduced response, whereas missing eye contact with an unattractive face may be a relief.
The thing is, it doesn't matter if Sapolsky only reads The Guardian and not the studies. The studies are incidental and anyway invalid. They're only there to generate a press release for the authors to promote not their findings, but their fantasies.
Dr. Camp said, "It is not only important to us to have an attractive mate. Attractiveness in our society is associated with secondary factors. One of them is social status."
Well, it's a theory anyway, and look, I know your office is called a lab, and I'm sure it's good with kids and the mentally handicapped, but your study said nothing about attractiveness, and even less about social status. Yet you're now telling me social status is rewarding in the same way as attractiveness? That's barely good enough for Cora.
If you are a lonely bear in the forest, maybe that is the only thing you would concentrate on, to find the most attractive bear to mate with.
Neuroscientists, everybody. The study says nothing about sexual attraction, regular attraction, social status, the male gaze, or bears.
No real bears.
Won't stop anybody from pinning the paradigm on the fMRI. The paradigm can be as vague as you need it to be, as long as Sapolsky and the new neuroscientists can invoke neuroanatomical terms like
rhinocephalonic sort of structure.
Or
the amygdala. That's kind of interesting.
Because they need psychology to appear to function modularly.
You want to have these fixed action patterns.
So modules can be inherited, and evolutionary psychology can be true, so that they can then go on tour and say whatever they like about psychology, and it won't be sophistry because, duh, biology.
The single biggest predictor of whether or not a prisoner got parole or not was how many hours it had been since the judge had had a meal. If we understand the biology of this, blood glucose levels have something to do with whether your neurons can work really hard. And what counts as working really hard in your frontal cortex? Viewing the world from someone else's perspective, trying to think about their mitigating circumstances. The frontal cortex takes a lot of energy to do the harder thing. And what's even more striking is, if you took any of those judges 2 seconds after they made that decision, and you said, okay, so why'd you send this guy back to jail, but this guy walked, they're not going to say, oh, because of my blood glucose. No, they're going to cite like freshman philosophy class or something. And
But it was almost a waste of time for me to correct any of these details because the study is even dumber than that. The article keeps saying ventral striatum, but this isn't a picture of that, unless by ventral they mean dorsal and by striatum they mean thalamus? Globus pallidus? The image looks like it's sliced around z equals 10 or 11, which makes it the right depth for these numbers here, but the numbers are nowhere near the NAC, which is way deeper and anterior, which means that these coordinates on the left are not even visible in this picture, let alone bright yellow. Yes, they are deeper, but they're not deep enough. They're only halfway there. So it's not even correct to say that the study found activation in the reward regions, unless by reward regions they mean the British press.
Addiction is an extreme example. I don't think normal faces would lead to addiction. He added, it must be a super face.
Nigel, you delicious cad. Wash your hair. It might be useful to take a step back and look at some of the
whole literature by now
showing young, healthy coxmen not only like looking at mugshots, but in fact get a cocaine kick of rewarding dopamine when they do it. Here we go. Beautiful faces have variable reward value, fMRI, and behavioral evidence. 8 bros from Boston berated the beautifulness of both boys and babes using a 1 to 7 scale, which is a kind of rating scale only a bonehead would come up with. And then 6 other alpha males were put into fMRI machines, and those images were flashed every 4 seconds for 0.2 seconds at a time, and it turns out Sapolsky was kind of right. There is a comparative surge of dopamine in the reward centers of cis heteronormative lacrosse players when they look at thumbnails of beautiful women. Oh my. Bros. Is there anything you want to tell us? This is a safe space. Not only does it not suggest anything sexual is involved, it pretty much suggests not even beauty is involved. Before you invent me a BS and evolution explanation for this, realize that the results could have been validly presented backwards, that the nucleus accumbens is involved in rewarding pics of D&D players who are no threat, but oh, weirdly, it picks up women that are. Another 15 borderline alcoholics had the pictures flash before them and they could press a button in order to make the image linger longer. And it should be obvious from the picture that the men did want to see the beautiful women longer. And if it is obvious, you know it's a defense. Hold that thought for 2 paragraphs. You could, as the authors did, start wernicking a theory that there is a difference between liking and wanting, which completely pretends not to need to explain a quarter of the data. And if we're just saying things without any scientific rigor, there's at least a way better explanation for this offered by Lacan. Sapolsky does explain this incongruity both correctly and terribly.
Where if you press the levers adequately, you will get a reward, and they now carry out this behavior, and as a result, they get the reward here. And as we saw, dopamine doesn't go up after the reward, it goes up at this point. This is the, I know how to do this, this is going to be great, this is terrific. Here's where you get the rise in dopamine. This is not only the anticipation, but if you don't have this rise, you don't get the behavior.
Except he already said,
you stick them in brain scanners and you do something or other sexually arousing or interesting or something or other to them, and then you see what parts of the brain activate, and it's these dopamine pathways consistently way up there.
So is a beautiful female the reward that lights up the dopamine pathways, and the ugly male the anticipation of the reward? Because in this part, they always showed 4 male or 4 female faces in a row. So the only thing this could anticipate is this. But then why isn't this anticipating this? You'll say he's just trying to keep the explanation simple. Well, my issue isn't with the simplification, but the fluidication, able to pick and choose the explanation that fits the outcome he wants to come out. The authors of this paper are just as bad, because neither nor both of the reward models can explain the data showing dopamine spikes in 50% of all the photos. So they don't. Even more fundamentally, if the study is literally about reward, how does dopamine know which is a cue and which is a reward? If you know you have to button press to get a tablet of amphetamine, and your dopamine rises with the cue telling you,
I know how to do this, this is going to be great.
It's all well and good, but the only way you'd even participate in this experiment is if you already learned amphetamines were delicious. So at some basic level, the tablet is the cue for the reward that comes with swallowing it that you were trained to expect. So is the light cueing the deliciousness or the appearance of the tablet? Are you sure? This distinction is pedantic if you're only trying to get people addicted to amphetamines.
It's for your mouth. Let me know if you need a bigger piece.
But it does matter when you're trying to understand which brain regions are involved and when and how. So this woman is a reward? Well, how do we know what was rewarding about this picture is her stunning 480p beauty and not something else? And how do we even know that this woman is beautiful? Don't say it's innate. I will absolutely come to your house and stack your books. And stop it with your symmetric faces.
But symmetry is what they say is a lot in the eye of beauty, right? Okay.
I have a little bit of experience with ancient Athens, and I can say with no hesitation that if I had to go back in time under a forced choice paradigm, well, hell no, and get me out of this effing MRI. Now, if I grew up there under their culturally operant conditioning, I'm sure I'd kidnap Helen too if she was asking for it. And when you just want to change behavior, these questions are academic. But when you are claiming to understand and even model desire and behavior at the synaptic level, well, you kind of have to define your terms. Anywho, none of this matters in the paper because you can't link the region's activation to the standard button pressing paradigm you learned in bio. For example,
he will not lever press to see a male who is lower ranking than him, but he will lever press the most to see pictures of female rhesus monkeys who are in heat. Whoa, is that weird or what?
It doesn't apply to this paper because there were, in fact, 2 buttons. The gamers were told that if they toggled the ZX keys, the pictures would change faster, and if they toggled the NM keys, it would linger longer. And as a small point, the equation in the paper they used to generate the faster or slower times, I think, is wrong. It only works if it's divided by k, not times k. That way each toggle is less effective at changing the time, and the discrete case behaves like the continuous exponential decay. And toggling ZN and XM would have been a better method to avoid issues of laterality in the future experiments if it turns out left and right hemispheres matter.
The results showed that subjects expended effort only to increase the viewing time of beautiful female faces. For all other categories, they keep press to make the faces disappear faster.
But with all this button pressing, which behavior button followed the dopamine rise?
If you don't have this rise, you don't get the behavior.
In other words, for what reward did they actually do the most work? 8 seconds was the default duration of the pictures. Does this look like they worked to keep something or get rid of something? It is quite evident that they pressed not to make the pretty women linger, but mostly to get to the pretty women faster. This matters now because you have no idea what the dopamine rise relates to. For example, they may have been told that the ZX buttons make the lacrosse players disappear faster, but to the penis accumbens it could be interpreted as the ZX button pressing gets you to the MILFs sooner. You have no idea. So now you have multiple possibilities. When you see this, press ZX to get to... Or, when you see this, press ZX just to have the ugliness removed. Or, when you see this, you better press NM or you'll be deprived of your enjoyment. Or, when you see this, don't press ZX or you'll get a jump scare. You have a dopamine spike in half the images with 4 to 6 possible paradigms that it could be related to. Any conclusions you reach are either going to be impossible to test or deliberately misleading. You simply can't reach any conclusions based on this unless you're the authors who picked the one they want.
But exert effort via a key press procedure only to view images of attractive females.
Also, and this is admittedly very petty of me, but I get a little worried about the technical, let alone mathematical sophistication of a paper that feels it necessary to explain what the E means. I mean, who is the audience for this paper?
Oh my God, what is going on here? This is pitiful.
It would have been interesting to get Sapolsky's take on this study since it contradicts his hopes and dreams. Oh wait, he wrote about it in his book.
What's that about? One neuroimaging study sheds some light. Young heterosexual men looked at pictures of attractive women versus, as a control, of attractive men. Passively observing the pictures activated the reward circuitry just alluded to. In contrast, working to see the pictures, by repeatedly pressing a button, also activated the amygdala.
Attractive men might be controlling, but they were hardly the control. Pictures were indeed passively observed, you got me there. Amygdala activation did occur, kind of, sort of, okay, not really. But this had nothing to do with button pressing since these results were during passive viewing. There were no scans done during the button pressing part of the study, and the whole button pressing thing was a bit complicated and anyway had nothing to do with activating anything. You get the idea.
In contrast to this picture of growing, precarious arousal, the amygdala deactivates in both men and women during orgasm.
No reference? It's a weird thing not to reference. Amygdala deactivation. Wait a second. No. No. Oh my God.
Alcohol brings down fear levels. Everyone knows if you give alcohol to women, it is easier.
And once you're not actually sure what you found, it sets up the paper to be used any way needed by the next people. Here's an example. Are attractive people rewarding? They begin.
From the standpoint of evolutionary social psychology.
Social psychology? What the? Differences, okay. No. Oh, come on.
Facial attractiveness is generally believed to indicate the genetic fitness and reproductive capacities of encountered individuals. However, when selecting mates, men place greater importance on attractiveness than do women, whereas women favor status and resources more so than men.
Maybe Gen X women, but first of all, I don't need to go through those references. The statement is meaningless. Which kind of women, on what websites, at which stage of their lives, under what circumstances? None of these studies even attempted to consider these, and there is nothing a priori to allow anyone to assume that evolutionary social psychology, and genetic fitness, even if relevant.
You see what I did there, right?
I'm triggered.
Don't you hate pants?
Can be detected by Fourier transform through the noise of post-internet life. A divorced mom of 2 PFAs may just about have had it with lying-ass cheaters and unemployed forearm tattoos. Not to mention, there are entire internets named after their autism meds, claiming women are both sluts and whores, evolutionarily programmed to marry a beta male they will cuckold because betas are really good providers? Protectors? And if you think men only go mate with young, attractive women, you're either in a sorority or lonely. Get off social media.
I don't think guys understand the power they have over girls.
Take a look at your own sexual history and tell me if honestly you only betted the hot chicks or the rich guys. Oh, come on, that's not fair. You know perfectly well it's because we can't get what we really want. What a person wants is sometimes a defense against what satisfies them. Sorry, I'm a doorway. In an attempt to pretend this is true, they reference a beautiful faces study.
Results revealed that male participants preferentially activate the NACC and the OFC when perceiving attractive female faces, and support the claim that attractive faces are processed by some of the same brain areas as other rewarding stimuli.
But note the omission about the average males, which doesn't support the claim. That's how you keep an ideology alive. Note also how beautiful became attractive and attractive became sexually appealing, because they need category diffusion that can be used for sophistry while pretending these are categorical values that are being used for science. They do note that
although other fMRI studies investigating the perception of facial attractiveness have consistently reported the involvement of the OFC.
Never mind. Other than Aaron,
involvement of the NAC during the perception of attractiveness has not yet been replicated.
But I can assure you they concede this only because they're about to replicate it. Ta-da! 48, I assume, alcoholics from
Dartmouth College
were put into an MRI scanner, apparently made by a cheap knockoff brand company, hold that thought, and rated the opposite sex images on a scale of 1 to GPA. Wait, the highest is a 1?
Excuse me?
And no surprise, unlike anyone else, they found activation in the NAC, just not the sex difference they were hoping for. Oh, thank God, they found the sex difference somewhere else. So now they may reasonably conclude their paper with...
The present findings extend prior work in this domain by demonstrating that increases in OFC activity for attractive faces are restricted to male participants. This sex difference in MOFC activity may provide a potential mechanism underlying the reason why males identify attractiveness as a stronger motivation in mate selection.
But wait a second. While it is true that there was a sex difference in the activation of the MOFC, it's actually the opposite of what they're saying. Their medial OFC wasn't activated, it was deactivated less, which is the opposite of what it's supposed to do according to the other paper that they themselves reference. The MOFC is supposed to activate with reward, while the lateral OFC increases with punishment. And I guess we should just ignore that the paper not only showed a differential response between medial and lateral, but also between hemispheres, right and left OFC respond differently to reward and punishment. Even if you stretch this and say that what matters is a direction of the change, what's the baseline? Do men reward attractiveness or punish anything less than perfection? Do women see all men as punishment? What? When they flash up a picture of Rachel Maddow over here, can anyone tell me if this represents a reward or a punishment? Because I can't. See, the fundamental problem is that, like Aaron's paper, beautiful, the study keeps using the word attractiveness. I think it means what you think it means. And certainly nothing makes it about mate or sexual attractiveness. I mean, there are literally all of the Hollywood actresses that I would agree are attractive, beautiful, glamorous, and powerful, whatever, that I would absolutely cheat on with a nanny.
Government nanny?
Look, how long does it take for you to accurately determine whether you're sexually attracted to someone? An instant? Hell, I can and have done it with sniper precision at 100 paces from a silhouette. Is she a representative member of this group? Because in order to have the statistical power to generate this sex difference, they had to collapse the ratings, 1 and 2, and 3 and 4, into 2 bins only. Take a look at these ratings. The men did not rate the majority of the faces as hot or ugly. They gave them more average ratings. That simply doesn't look like these men were seeing, let alone dopaminating over, anything sexually attractive. Because if you telling me this, causing this, was due to her attractiveness, okay, fine, sure, whatever. But no way in hell am I buying that this was causing this because of a reflexive physiologic response to her reward value as a potential mate, and not because my brain didn't immediately think, yo, is that Pat Benatar or Fears from Tears for Fears? Simple terms, this study cannot be testing response to attractive faces because these women aren't attractive. I don't mean subjectively not attractive, I mean objectively not attractive. This word is a lie, which makes this title a lie. Neuroscience is not for you because you can't study activation of dopamine receptors if you're just going to lie about turning them on. Maybe after 3 years of porn I'm jaded, or maybe these Dartmouth boys have a lower threshold than I do. Even ChatGPT wants you stopped.
And it's these dopamine pathways consistently way up there.
Can you believe it? It's always in the last place you look. but it's actually the only place they looked. The way he makes it sound, everyone is surprised that when they do a reward experiment, the NAC lights up, but a lot of that consistently comes from the fact that when they do these studies, they're only looking at regions of interest, i.e., when they want to have a reward paradigm, they look at the NAC, not the cerebellum. There's nothing methodologically wrong with this, but it is misleading to make it sound as if your paradigm uniquely activated the NAC because you wanted it to, because it conveys the impression that the brain is far more modular than it is. For example, there's another study done by the exact same people using the exact same procedure and the exact same subjects using the exact same machine and the exact same faces, but because they used a totally different title, they found activity only in a different region of the brain, the paracingulate cortex. The other thing of note is how Sapolsky tells us
it's these dopamine pathways consistently
in a reward paradigm, implying that therefore the dopamine pathways must be involved in reward. But this study uses the fact that the NAC lights up to therefore it must be a reward paradigm. But that's absolutely illogical. If you did a study where instead of pressing ZX to get rid of jokingly horrendous pictures, you had to get rid of actually horrendous pictures of mutilated bodies, snakes, influencers, you'd probably guess that the amygdala would light up. But how do you explain that it's only the right amygdala, meanwhile both NAC? I'm sure a podcast will explain it like it's being in an abusive relationship where you're just really happy he's not drunk today. But I have to believe that even in 2025, there is a difference between a scientifically testable hypothesis and an Instagram story backed by a hashtag of authority.
Did you know that narcissistic abuse actually causes brain damage in the victims? Let me explain it to you here. When you're with a narcissist, they stress you out. Duh, that's a given. The stress hormone in your body is called cortisol. Your cortisol level in your body over time raises to such an astronomical level that if it was spread over to 2 to 3 people, it would still be considered high for those 3 people, but it's all within you. That high cortisol level is going to actually cause your hippocampus to shrink. Your hippocampus is a part of your brain that's in charge of your short-term memory and your decision making. It's also going to swell your amygdala, which is in charge of your primal emotions. You know, the fears, the anxieties, the guilt, the lust, the shame, all of that. It's going to swell it up, so it's going to make it hyperactive. So you're going to be in a constant state of survival mode. This is what's anatomically happening biologically in your brain. You're not crazy. You're not crazy at all.
I could go on, but then I'd be missing the real point of this and all these papers, which is to use the dubious results of a study with poor construct validity and make the most outrageous inferences padded with tangentially relevant references, i.e. make anything up.
Because the reward value of attractive faces may serve a functional role in mate selection, it is possible that exclusively viewing faces of the opposite sex encourages individuals to consider their potential mate value.
Jesus. Look, I'm no psychoanalyst, but it appears the authors have naturally selected a cognitive bias that ensures that whenever you're surrounded by women, you can only see them as chicks. I mean, gee, good thing there aren't a lot of women majoring in neuroscience. Uh-oh.
Nice stems. Thanks.
You do see that it would be equally reasonable, i.e. stupidly meaningless, to say that if all you have are bros, then everything becomes a hoe, even if you're respectful and say with grown-up phrases like greater marginal utility under scarcity and compression into a dominant role, though that will get you published. Let me check with econ majors. Wow. Look, maybe you guys all need to do an exchange program or straight up busing. It would be interesting to get a female perspective on the proper allocation of capital and possibly not robbing the Indians, and it would help neuroscientists a lot to get some actual data scientists involved in hypothesis testing. Because this means literally nothing. And not to get nitpicky, but left is over here, though I realize that researchers often do it opposite to clinicians, which is very frustrating, at least to me, when it's not labeled. But it's not nearly as frustrating as labeling this as an axial slice when it's a coronal slice, a mistake which is really a lot more common in these articles than you would think, since most of the images aren't actually from the subject's MRIs, they come from a standard atlas. So either these axes are messed up, in which case these coordinates aren't the nucleus accumbens, or you looked up the wrong image? Or like this other study, you went over to Wikipedia? I mention these little mistakes not because I'm so perfect, but because in theory this paper went through several co-authors, and 3 peer reviewers, and an actual editor that charges $1,000 per submission if you wanted open access, which makes it a vanity publication. But of course, these mistakes are meaningless because none of the authors nor anyone reading them really cares about what regions are involved. Whether the NAC activates or strokes out is irrelevant. The goal is to say enough Latin pronouns to medicalize the theory of evolutionary scientism. And if it turns out there's a sex difference in the MOFC or the left chupacabra, so much the better. It becomes a trivial matter to assign function to those regions based on the use of synonyms. It's not even science, it's a fetish. And I know a lot about fetishes. I wrote a whole book on them. So I know that the desire for something to be true, notice I said the word desire, not belief, always masks an underlying rage.
Which, what do you make of this, is apparently there is a reliable gender difference
Now, people are going to be like, this is bullshit. Listen, this has been replicated more than 5 times.
In the length of the second finger versus the fourth finger, the ratio of the two. And just to show how whoa, did a lot of hands just go up in this auditorium.
It's directly related to how much testosterone you were exposed to in utero when you were in your mommy's belly.
Can I put this hand down? Yeah.
So yeah, you can put that hand down.
And what has been shown quite reliably since then is, on the average, gay men tend to have the finger length ratio of straight women rather than of straight men.
Gay men have a hypermale pattern. That the index finger, the pointer finger tends to be relatively shorter than the ring finger.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Fuck.
Okay, so
that shit's close.
A very small difference in everyone, but in gay men, it tends to move much greater. Now,
so in the gay men, the pointer finger is a little bit more shorter than the ring finger.
Correct.
Wow. Correct. Ooh, that's gay.
A small effect there. Another even more bizarre finding, which is there is something called the autoacoustic reflex. And what that is if you sit there and plug your ears up with your fingers, you will hear a noise that's just coming from the intrinsic vibration of something or other in your ears, and that's the autoacoustic reflex generating some low hertz sound in there. And the rate of the oscillation differs by sex in humans, which no doubt explains everything about the tragic wars of the sexes and why people just don't understand each other by gender because of their ears vibrating at different speeds. But what these studies have also shown was gay men having the autoacoustic reflexive vibratory speed more typical of straight women than straight men. Again, a very small effect. What are all of these about? The assumptions are it's got to do with something with prenatal hormone environment. Stay tuned, we will be coming back to this.